Let's turn to God's Word. If you have a Bible in front of you, Acts chapter 17. Most of the words will appear on the screen as well. Now, as it happens in the providence of God, I'm going to be looking at this passage at St. Andrew's Church student dinner this coming Tuesday. And it's just, I find it, Acts 17, I find it just such an amazing passage. Last week we saw that the scriptures could be trusted and they're the ones that bring us to Christ. But how do we know Christ and how do we know the real Christ? At the student lunch last week, a young Chinese woman asked, how do we know which religion to choose? Which was such an interesting and profound question, actually. And I think that the message that is here in Acts 17 is something that is essential for the whole of this area, this city, this region. Derek Thomas says this: how do we react to living in a city that's dominated by non-Christian ideology and religion, aesthetically beautiful, culturally sophisticated, but morally decadent and spiritually dead? Now, I guess if you're from Sydney, you may consider Newcastle not to be culturally sophisticated, but I think it is, actually. And I think it is beautiful in many ways. But I also think there is a moral decadence and a spiritual deadness. There's so many good things about life here. You know, this morning, even just today, walking down to Dudley Beach and guys cycling past with their surfboards, you know, to go surfing at 6 in the morning. What a great thing to be able to do. Other people, was out yesterday afternoon. I went for a swim at the baths, and the restaurants all along Merriweather, absolutely crammed. So many good things to do. You go to the shopping centres, so many things. I look at things even culturally that are available. There's the Writers' Festival on this weekend. Got all these things. And a lot of people would just simply say, what do we need Jesus for? I was tempted today, because there was a whole bunch of surfers just standing ready to go in, and I was tempted to go up to them and say, look, when you're done, do you think you could do something a little bit more important and come to church? I just didn't have the nerve. Next time I hope I will. But I think Paul was faced with that situation in Athens. Now, Athens was a center of politics, religion, culture, and philosophy. It is arguably the birthplace of Western democracy, music, ethics, theater, and medicine. It only had 12,000 people, and actually it was suffering from depopulation at this time because people were moving to Corinth. Paul was here almost like on a kind of a break, because he was waiting for his companions who'd been in Thessalonica and in Berea, and he'd been sent there early just to protect himself. And he went to the synagogue, and he went to the marketplace. And then there was this dispute. Now, ignore the handsome young gentleman in that photograph, but that's where he spoke, literally. We know that that's exactly the spot where he spoke. And it's quite incredible to stand there. And the Areopagus, and the temple, the Parthenon, is behind, and it's an incredible structure. And it really helps you understand what he's saying when you understand it and you go there. Now, he ends up having a discussion with two groups of people, Epicureans and Stoics. And most of us fit into one of these two philosophies because they are the philosophies, largely, very much, of our culture. The Epicureans were based on atomic physics of Democritus. Please don't think that science just happened a couple of hundred years ago. Democritus was around in the years 341 to 270 BC. And they were essentially materialists. They were people who believed that the only things that really existed and mattered were material things, and you could explain everything materially. Epicureans are Sydney materialists who live for their house and their boat and their foreign tours and their wines and just what you can purchase. The Stoics, on the other hand, came from a leader called Zeno. I think that's such a cool name, 340 to 265. And their idea was that there was reason within the universe, that the world was divine, but they were very fatalistic. So if you know the phrase, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. We used to sing that as Scottish football fans because we knew, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. We're probably going to get thumped, but never mind. It's all in the hands of the gods. But that's the attitude and the philosophy that they had. And Stoics tended to be defenders of tradition. And Paul comes and he reasoned with them in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks as well as in the marketplace. And there's a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Now, just some things to note before I need to warn you, I've got 10 points. This is still the introduction, but you will get home before midday. But just to let you know that there's just some things to grasp here. Firstly, notice that Paul doesn't say the Bible says. Well, why? Why didn't he say that? Because they didn't accept the Bible. He gave them chapter and verse. It wouldn't make any difference to them. He just said what the Bible says. Now, I'm not going to be able to have a look at everything he says. I said I've got 10 points. The first 2 will take up nearly all the time, but I'll mention the others. But I do think they're worth looking at. I almost toyed with the idea of doing a sermon on each of these points, but I decided to leave it because I want us to finish Acts at some point. Another thing about this sermon, there are some people who comment on this who think his sermon wasn't a very good one. It doesn't fit their idea of what a good sermon should be. It doesn't mention the cross, and it doesn't say much about Jesus. The only thing we can say is we don't have an account here of the whole conversation and discussion. You could read this in 2 minutes. Paul was almost certainly there for hours. And we know in verse 18 that he was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So, you know, it's a fascinating thing. There are people who look at this and say, well, Paul didn't get many converts in Athens, and that's because he just basically got this sermon wrong. And it's not how you should preach a sermon today. I tend to go the opposite way. I could look at this for weeks on end. I think it's incredibly amazing and incredibly deep stuff. Notice they also accuse Paul of being a babbler. What's this babbler trying to say? And they use a word which says seed picker. And what they're saying is he's a plagiarizer. And what do they mean by a plagiarizer? They mean somebody who's just picking up bits here and there. In effect, they're saying, here's Paul, and he's gone on Google, and he's just making this stuff up. Well, they then make an extremely serious charge against him, that he's advocating foreign gods. Now, you'll have heard of a man called Socrates. About 400 years before this, 450 years before this, Socrates was executed in this place by being forced to drink a cup of poisoned hemlock because of the very same charge. You're advocating foreign gods. They also misunderstood him. They thought he was speaking about 2 different gods, a man called Jesus and a goddess called Anastasia. Anastasia is a lovely name. It just simply means resurrection. And then let me just say something that John Stott says, that many people are rejecting our gospel today, not because they perceive it to be false, but they perceive it to be trivial. This is the very opposite of trivial. As I go through these things, you will see that these are very deep things. So, what does he say? And I'm going to say he says 10 things that point to Christ. He had observed their idols and gods, and he says, I'm going to tell you about this unknown God. And he's not, in a sense, I don't think in a sense he's condemning them. He's using what they've got, and he's pointing them, and we need to do that ourselves. So the first thing of this, verses 22 to 23, religion points to Christ. Paul then stood up in the middle of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. Now, we have the great privilege of hosting in our halls a wonderful organization, AA. I really do think it's a marvelous organization. And the people I've met in it is just incredible, and they do an incredible work. And I actually think they have a lot to teach us as a church as well. I've been reading some of their material and some of their stuff, and I'm absolutely certain it was an organization founded by Christians, but because they wanted other people to be able to join, they talked about you have faith in the power or God as you conceive him. And in one sense, that's perfectly understandable. And in another sense, it's not enough. And I'll tell you why. Because God as he is might be different from God as we conceive him to be. In other words, we don't just conceive who God is. Now, Paul is dealing in a culture where people believed in God. In fact, they believed in many gods. And he's saying, you worship a God you don't know. And it's a kind of jibe, almost. You know, you worship something you don't know. But he said, I am going to tell you about this God you do not know. Now, here's a really important thing. There is a sense of religion in human society and the human heart. That, by the way, is why AA works so well, because it's appealing to something that's already there. It doesn't have to be instilled in people. And that sense of religion in human society and in the human heart it is so difficult for you to get away from that. Now, you'll note that Paul does not begin to attempt to prove the existence of God. That's impossible. You cannot prove the existence of God to people who think they are in a position to judge that. What he does is he just begins with God and he proclaims God. He says, we tell you about Christ. I remember a lady coming into church, never been in church before, and she walked out, and the words she said to me were probably some of the most encouraging I've ever heard. I was talking about Jesus, and she said, that's what I've been looking for all my life. That's what I'm looking for. Why? Here's a question. Why has there never been a non-religious human society, and when we attempt to do it, it's always been a disaster? I think C.S. Lewis's answer, which I've cited often, is the correct one. We have an appetite for food because there's food. We have an appetite for sex because there's sex. We have an appetite for God because there is God. There is a sense of God that is there. And here's the thing. Atheism is not a revelation of the truth. I used to be on the Richard Dawkins website quite a lot for my sins. I'm off it now. I've repented, but I used to be on it quite a lot and stir things up. And believe it or not, this atheist website had something called Convert's Corner. So if you converted from Christianity or Islam, but usually just Christianity, you joined Convert's Corner. And I just thought that was such a fascinating thing. It had testimonies and everything else. You know, it was like AA, Atheists Anonymous. It was just an amazing thing. Sometimes people would argue, you only believe because your parents brought you up that way. But what about the opposite? You know, what about the fact that there are many people who don't believe in God because that's the way they were brought up? I listened to a podcast not so long ago where a man stated that as a child he instinctively believed in God. It is only when he discovered his parents were atheists that he became a firm materialist. He became an Epicurean, in other words. Even people who profess to be atheists, there's something within that niggles away. I remember a young man coming to a Bible study. I think it was like a Christianity Explored thing. And I asked everyone, you know, what their name was and why they were there. And this young man said, my name is so-and-so, and I'm here because I'm a backslidden atheist. And I went, whoa, what's a backslidden atheist? He said, I'm beginning to doubt my atheism. I was brought up as an atheist. Everyone in my society was an atheist, or at least agnostic. And now I'm beginning to think maybe there's something there. Another time I remember hearing the author James Robertson, who wrote just an amazing book called The Testimony of Gideon Mack. in which Gideon Mack, a pastor, a minister, meets the devil. And it's so well written that this woman stood up in the bookstore and she said, I don't believe, and I know you don't believe, but did Gideon Mack really meet the devil? Which is amazing conversation. And she then asked him, do you believe in God? And he said, no, I don't. But I often wonder if he's there. I look over my shoulder. I'm a Presbyterian atheist. I don't believe in God, but I look behind just in case. Well, in Paul's Athens, there were numerous religious statues. There was Apollos and Jupiter and Venus and Mercury and Diana, all the gods of Olympus. In that context, what Paul was to say was quite radical because the Greeks believed that there was a radical separation between matter and spirit, and no God could participate in matter and still be divine. But Paul comes and says God came down and became human and became flesh and blood. And that challenges their religion and it shatters their religion. Today, we might say we don't have false religion or idols. It's nonsense. This city is full of idols. And so is your heart. Calvin talks about the human heart being a factory of idols. And my heart is full of idols. It's so easy. I think the work of Tim Keller on this, if you read any of his books, he will keep referring to this about the idols that we have. And there are idols that stop us coming to Christ or stop us acknowledging who God is. And Paul comes and he challenges that. Religion, when we say that religion points to Christ, we're not saying that all religions are different paths to the same God. The most difficult question I was asked last week with the students was a young Muslim man from the Middle East who asked, why is Christianity right and Islam not? Well, how do you answer that without being offensive? And I was actually deeply encouraged by him. I thought he was a thoughtful and intelligent young man willing to listen. Paul challenges the view that all religions are different paths to the same God. I'm astounded at how many Presbyterian churches I've been in where there are people who fundamentally believe that. Oh, we like being Presbyterian because it's our culture or whatever, but we don't want to condemn other people who have a different view of God. All religions are... Well, I'm sorry. If you do that, you're condemning Paul and you're also condemning Christ, because that's not what Christ taught. Do you know that the early Christians were called atheists by the Greeks, by these very Greeks in Athens and elsewhere, because they didn't believe in all the different gods? I think the fact that we have a religion points to our need for God, that most religions take us away from the real God, which is why the Bible has far more to say about false religion than it does about atheism. The number one reason, in my view, that people don't believe is because of false religion. And also, can I say this? People who profess Christianity, even Orthodox Christianity, and yet what they profess is not lived out in their lives, and they are hypocrites, and people look at that and go, well, if that's Christianity, I don't want it. And I completely understand and empathize with that point of view. Because I would say this, man's religions are his greatest crimes. Paul is standing in front of the Parthenon, their multi-billion-pound project, and he's saying, you've wasted your money because this is not where God is. He doesn't live in temples built by human hands. Second thing is, creation points to God. Romans 1:18. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. You stand on Dudley Beach, or take a beach of your choosing, at 6 o'clock in the morning with the sun rising and the waves crashing. And it's unbelievably stunning. And it tells you of the power of God, and it tells you of the glory of God. And again, I almost want to say to people, who? Who did this? Are you worshiping nature? Is this all an accident? Or is this the greatest work of art conceived and put into being by the greatest artist? Paul says, in effect, you're rejecting the revelation of God. He gives everyone life and breath and everything else. In the French Revolution, which, by the way, if you're ever tempted to say the French Revolution was a pretty good thing, it was a horrendous thing, and we're still seeing the effects of that. In the French Revolution, they stated, "We will pull down your steeples so that you'll not be reminded of your superstition." Xi Jinping in China has boasted that he intends to remove 1,000 steeples a month. You know what the Christians said in the French Revolution? They said, yeah, you can pull down our steeples, but you won't be able to rip the stars out of space. You can't do it. You can't take that away. Creation points to Christ. Okay, that's the 2 points, and you're looking at the clock saying, okay, we could really run out here. No, I'm just going to really list the others. Life points to Christ. If you want to hear more, come along to the student thing on Tuesday. Life points to Christ. Verse 25, he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. You know, one of the things that makes me believe in God is when I see a dead person. You know, it's so funny. I'm sorry, I keep mentioning this, but, you know, silent witness with all the bodies being cut up and all that kind of stuff. And I've now got to a stage where I'm not so upset by it anymore because I see what it is. It's just the way they see it. It's just flesh. The life has gone. I think, you know, we should treat the human body with dignity even in death. I certainly think we should. But the reality is what makes us human is that we have this life that is breathed into us. There is no way that you can look at this lectern and see it as a material thing and then look at yourself and say, well, I'm not really that much different. I'm just material as well. No, you're not. This is not living. You are living. Why are you living? Because God breathed his breath into you, and one day that breath will be taken away. Now, I feel that so much within myself because there was a point in my life where I found it enormously difficult to breathe. And I had to, you know, be incubated and all that kind of stuff. And I realized then that I'm just a breath. But that breath is the breath of life. And God has given us all life. And life points to Christ. Why are you alive? Because of God. History points to Christ. Point number 4, verse 26. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. God is the ruler of history. It's not random. It's interesting, in Marxist historiography, you get the idea that human beings start here, and then we get to this stage, then we get to this stage, then we get to the next stage. And the whole idea is that humanity is a progression, and that history is heading towards an inevitable point, the dictatorship of the proletariat, and this wonderful nirvana society, which has never happened. But in one sense, Mark wasn't entirely wrong because history isn't entirely random. It's not a progression, it's a circle. It goes up and down and up and down. But God is the ruler of history. As a historian, I would say I cannot stress how convinced I am of that there is something going on. The arts point to Christ. Verse 28, in him we live and move and have our being. Now, why do I say that in terms of the arts? Paul cites 2 pagan poets, Aratus and Clynthius. Aratus was a poet from his own city, Tarsus. Now, I think that what poets often do, I think what creative people often do, what artists often do, what good songwriters often do, okay? I'm excluding Beyonce at this point, but even Beyonce could get something, you know, but there's a truth that gets expressed. I mean, I often cite poets like Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan is a poet, because they point to something. Culture far too often leads us to worshiping ourselves, not the creator, but real art points us towards the artist. Music points us towards the ultimate musician. I do think that the arts point to Christ. It's why, for many people, the most religious experience they have in today's world is to go into an art gallery and just to be stunned by it. Someone who comes to this congregation got bored this week and painted a replica of Van Gogh's stars. Just amazing, absolutely amazing. And I've actually seen the painting, the original painting, and you wonder, how could he have painted that and not known God? And then when you read about Van Gogh, you realize he did. You realize he went to Spurgeon's church in London and heard the gospel many times. You realize his father was a pastor. You realize he wrestled with demons in his own soul, trying to work out all of that. The arts point to Christ. Existential angst points to Christ. What do I mean by that? Verse 27, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. That's what we call the God-shaped hole. When we were going through Ecclesiastes, we came across Ecclesiastes 3:20. God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what he has done from beginning to end. What a burden God has laid on men. Do you really think all music is the same? Do you really think if we had, as we do have, a professional violinist who could play really well, we said, well, that's fine, but David, why don't you just do it? It wouldn't make any difference. You'd just be making a noise, and it's a joyful noise to the Lord. No, it would be a painful noise, and it would be embarrassing to the Lord and to all of you. You know, God gives us music, and the music points. This idea of beauty and everything else. Human beings point to Christ. We're at number 7, by the way, if you're wondering. Since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver, an image made by human design and skill. Every human being is made in the image of God. Now, you might be here and you might feel that you are the most vile creature on earth. It doesn't matter. You're made in the image of God. It's why we can never look down on anyone. It's why we can't be racist. It's why we can't be misogynist. It's why we can't be classist and despise people who are not like us. Because every human being is made in the image of God. I feel very convicted about this because I met someone this week and I treated them in a way which was not reflecting the fact that they were made in the image of God. Every human being is made in the image of God. Sin points to Christ. Verse 30, in the past God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. Why does sin point to Christ? Because sin tells us that we have gone away from a standard that God meant us to live. And listen, you have a very simple choice in this world. You can say, so there was a Palestinian activist this week who decided he would protest against Hamas. He's not condoning what Israel, he lives in Gaza. They stabbed him 150 times with a screwdriver. They killed him I can't even begin to describe the rest of the stuff they did to him. Then they hung a sign round his neck and displayed him to the children and said, this is what happens when you go against Hamas. Well, the sin in that is awful. But sin is in lots of different ways. Pride is an awful sin. Greed is an awful sin. Lust is an awful sin. All of us have sin. And what that tells us is you can either say, well, it's the way human beings are, tough. Or you can say, it's not the way we're supposed to be, and there has to be a way back to God from the dark paths of sin. Justice points to Christ. Verse 31, he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. Every child gets to a point in their life where they look and they say, that's not fair. Well, where do we get this idea of fairness? C.S. Lewis was converted through his argument against God, which said if there is a God, he's not fair. And the reason he was converted was, as he thought about it, he's a very intelligent man, and he worked out, hang on, where did I get the idea of fair? I could only have got the idea of fair in the same way I know a line is crooked because I've got a straight line to measure it by. So where's the straight line come from? And he said his own argument turned him away from his atheism and towards God. Justice points to God and to Christ. If you want to live in a world where someone can go and slaughter loads of people and then die in peace and nothing happens, That's not the world I want to live in. I don't think that's the world that exists. And then the last thing is this: the resurrection points to Christ. The Greek god Apollos said this, or whoever was writing about him: once a man dies and the earth drinks up his blood, there is no resurrection. Paul preaches his sermon, if you like, gives all these arguments, and then at the end he whams them right between the two eyes. He said, God has proved this by raising Jesus from the dead. And immediately, some sneer, others said they want to hear him. Raising someone from the dead. We're going to hear a lot about Easter. You see the sign I put up outside. We said, may you live to dance on your own grave, which for those of you who are much, much older and were into Christian music was a song from the 1970s. I just love the sentiment. The second line was, may you live to boogie all night long, but I didn't put that one up because I thought people wouldn't quite grasp it. But the resurrection, that's the proof that we offer. So, let me just summarize this. Without Christ, all these things are meaningless. There's a sense in which Paul comes in and says, look, you're right here, you're right here, you're right here, but you haven't gone far enough. Now, let's go the next step. For non-Christian, what's really quite disturbing is Paul's exclusivity. It's Christ or nothing. Some mocked, some said, let's hear more, because it takes time to work these things out. One of the old Puritans, I can't remember which one, but it's such a typical Puritan thing, said, some trees require several blows to be brought down. Some believed. Not many. But amazing, now there were real Christians in the cultural capital of the world. Dionysius was a member of the Areopagus. Eusebius says he became the first bishop of Athens. And again, the pattern in the New Testament church, Damaris, a prominent woman, became a believer. So let me summarize all of this. Can we go on to the last slide? Rivers of tears run down from my eyes because your law is not obeyed. How do we react to living in a city that is dominated by non-Christian ideology and religion? Aesthetically beautiful, culturally sophisticated, but morally decadent and spiritually dead. I think we do not speak as Paul spoke because we do not feel as Paul felt. He saw, he felt, he spoke. That's what it says. He was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. We fear. We want to defend Christianity. But listen, this is a lost city full of lost people. We don't need to defend Christianity. The word that's used in verse 16 is a word, paroxino, and it's the idea of being so moved within him. Now, if you come tonight, you'll see Jesus doing the same thing over death and over the death of Lazarus. In the Old Testament, the Lord was provoked to anger at the golden calf. I think we need to ask what our motives are in seeking to reach the lost. It's not to fill our church. God forbid that would be our motive. Our motive is obedience to God. But our motive also must be compassion. D.L. Moody in Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow, still to me, and when I read this, I've never ever forgotten it, and it still stands to me that he stood in a doorway as tens of thousands of people walked past, and he just wept because he saw the people as sheep without a shepherd. Rivers of tears run from my eyes because your law is not obeyed. And Paul didn't just weep, he did something. He shared the good news. He used the Socratean method in Athens, which was great, question and answer. He could speak to the religious in the synagogue, to passers-by in the city square, and to philosophers in the council. Church, cafe, and college. To do that, he himself had to think, be real, be filled with the Spirit, and be compassionate. He didn't answer Athens with a program. Come to me and come to our church, and we will give you this program that tells you. He went right to the heart of the matter, and he sat with people and discussed with people and talked with people. He didn't ask people questions about stuff they didn't know. He started where they were and showed them where they were going and offered them what they were looking for. And that's what we need to do. I think lots of Christians, the reason we don't share or evangelize is we just don't have the confidence. No, I don't mean confidence in ourselves even. I just mean confidence in the gospel. And I think I haven't got anything else. And if I can refer back to last Tuesday again, I was greatly encouraged by that. Because in that meeting, I had a Middle East Muslim, I had a Chinese atheist, I had a German agnostic, and who was the other one? Oh, yeah, a Kuwaiti, I presume Muslim, all saying, this makes sense. See, the gospel is for absolutely everybody. Every single one of you here, the gospel is for you. And for some of you, please, some internally will mock or will go away and just forget. Please don't do that. Some will say we need to hear more, and some will believe. May it be that you're in the latter category, but at least may you be in the middle one. Try and find out more. May God bless his word to us.